Just imagine, you built a successful life, achieved everything you wanted, but deep down, something always seemed missing. What would you do if, after 18 years, the past you tried to forget resurfaced before your eyes, bringing with it all the consequences of the choices you made? This is exactly John's reality. He, like so many others, went in search of wealth and prestige, leaving behind the woman he loved and the life that could have been. But fate, in its cruelest and most unexpected form, brought him face to face with the consequences of his decisions. A young woman he had never met, but who, in one look, brought back all the guilt and regret he had tried to bury. What would you do if you were in his place? Would he continue running, or would he finally face the ghosts of the past? The answer may not be easy, but John's journey is a powerful reminder that the past always finds a way to catch up with us, and that true success lies not in the things we accumulate, but in the people we have by our side. Ready to find out how John tries to mend the pieces of his life that he himself broke? John, upon disembarking the plane, felt the weight of years in every step he took through the airport. It wasn't just physical exhaustion, but an emotional exhaustion that had haunted him for years, the result of choices that seemed so right in his youth, but which now revealed themselves as shadows of the past. And it was in this scenario, amidst the comings and goings of strangers, that he saw her. That woman who had stayed behind, his wife, was there, but not alone. Beside her was a young woman whose face was a painful reminder of what John had blurted out. He didn't need more than a moment to understand. That young woman was his daughter, the reflection of a past that he never imagined revisiting in such an abrupt way. He felt his heart tighten, as if life, in its irony, was offering him a chance at redemption, an opportunity to repair his mistakes. The sight of that scene awakened a whirlwind of emotions in John. His mind began to wander to dormant memories, moments he thought were buried beneath the weight of a life dedicated to work. He remembered the decision he made years ago when he left everything behind to seek his fortune. At the time, the future seemed promising and the sacrifices justified. But now, seeing his daughter for the first time, he realized that the price paid had been too high. It wasn't just the wrinkles that marked his face, but also the guilt that gnawed at him from the inside. He knew that it wasn't enough to just find them again, but that he needed to regain lost trust, rebuild ties that he himself had broken. The moment John saw his daughter for the first time was like a punch in the gut. It wasn't just the physical resemblance that shook him, but what that resemblance represented. A life he didn't know, a story he had been absent from. He wondered what she knew about him, what Sarah had told him all these years. Was she full of rage? Would I be able to forgive him? These questions hammered his mind. But John knew that before any answer, he would have to prove his worth, demonstrate that his return was not just the result of chance, but of a deep need to redeem himself. As unexpected as the reunion was, John realized he couldn't let this opportunity slip away. It was as if fate, in its wisdom, was giving him one last chance to right what had been destroyed. The young woman, whose identity he only suspected, was the key to this new beginning. But how can you get closer to them without causing more pain? How to break the ice formed by years of absence and silence? John knew the path would be arduous, full of obstacles, but he was determined to face them. He felt that if he had any chance of making amends for the mistakes of the past, that chance began there, at that airport, with that unexpected encounter. Still not knowing how to approach them, John began to follow them from afar, trying to gather the courage to get closer. With every step I took, I felt like I was walking on a tightrope, where any false move could make everything collapse. But he had no choice. There was something inside him, a voice that urged him to continue. Maybe it was the weight of guilt, or maybe it was just the desire to finally find peace. But one thing was certain. That moment at the airport was the beginning of a journey he could never have predicted, a journey that would take him back to his own past in hopes of rebuilding the future. If you're enjoying the content, subscribe now to be part of our community and explore stories that touch the heart and provoke reflection. Click the subscribe button and activate the bell so you don't miss our next videos. Join us on this journey of discovery and transformation. As John moved on, the airport encounter kept reverberating in his mind. Every step he took seemed filled with a new perspective, a new way of seeing the choices he had made over the years. The luxurious life he had built in New York, with all its privileges and status, suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the emotional emptiness he felt. Now, as he revisited these memories, John realized that the relentless pursuit of wealth had left a gap in his soul, a gap that all the money in the world could not fill. He realized that the success he had longed for came at a very high cost, the loss of the family he abandoned in the name of blind ambition. John's thoughts took him back to the most crucial moments of his life, those decisive moments where everything could have been different. He remembered the day he decided to leave, leaving Sarah behind, and how at the time, that decision seemed inevitable. The lure of great opportunities, of promises of success, overshadowed any other consideration. But now, with the benefit of retrospect, John saw things in a completely different way. He wondered how many times Sarah had cried in silence, how many times Emily, her daughter, had asked about the father she never knew. These questions haunted his mind, each one bringing up a regret he knew he would have to confront. During this inner journey, John began to understand the true meaning of repentance. It was not just a feeling of sadness for what had been done, but a deep pain for everything that could have been. He realized that although time could not be reversed, there was a way to try to right the wrongs of the past through reconciliation. But to do so, he knew he would need to be honest with himself, admit the mistakes he made, and face the consequences of his actions. It was a difficult path, full of uncertainty, but John was determined to move forward. The image of Sarah and Emily at the airport served as a constant reminder of what was at stake. As the days passed, John began to reflect on the true value of the things he owned. What once seemed so essential, the cars, the properties, the investments, now began to lose its luster. He wondered how it would be possible to balance material life with the relationships he had neglected for so long. Perhaps it was possible, he thought, to find a middle ground where professional success did not come at the expense of personal happiness. This reflection brought to light a new resolve in John, that he would do everything in his power to reconnect with his family, even if it meant giving up certain things that he had considered non-negotiable. But even with this new determination, John couldn't help but feel a little afraid. The fear that perhaps it was too late to fix things. What would he do if Sarah and Emily didn't want to give him a second chance? What if his time away had caused irreparable damage? These doubts haunted him, but at the same time, they pushed him to act. He knew that no matter what happened, he couldn't live with the uncertainty of not having tried. So he began to plan his next move, aware that each step toward forgiveness and reconciliation would be crucial to restoring the broken bonds of his life. Emily, from the moment she saw John at the airport, felt an avalanche of contradictory emotions that left her stunned. The father figure she had never met was now before her, and what should have been a happy reunion was in fact a burden of unresolved feelings. John's presence revived a pain in her that she could barely express in words. Growing up without a father was a constant struggle, and now that he was back, Emily didn't know how to deal with the anger and resentment that had built up over the years. His first reaction was to close himself off, erecting a barrier that seemed insurmountable, as a natural defense against the pain of abandonment. As the days passed, Emily found herself increasingly confronted with the reality of John's presence. He tried to get closer, tried to speak, but each attempt was met with deafening silence or short, cold responses. She didn't know if she could trust him, and the idea of opening her heart to someone who had abandoned her seemed simply impossible. The anger she felt was deep and was accompanied by a sadness that she had kept inside for so long. Emily began to realize that although she longed for a father, John represented everything she had learned to despise. And now, he wanted to be a part of her life as if nothing had happened. Emily's fragile health only complicated the situation further. Dealing with a serious illness, she already had a lot to worry about, and John's return added an emotional burden she wasn't ready to face. The frequent visits to the hospital, the constant treatments, and the weight of knowing that his condition was serious made everything even more difficult. And now, with John trying to get back together, Emily felt even more pressured, as if she had to deal not only with the illness, but also with the whirlwind of emotions that his presence brought. She wondered if he really cared, or if he was just trying to ease his own guilt. But despite all her resistance, there were times when Emily allowed herself to question her own feelings. Did she really want to push John away forever? There was a part of her that still longed for connection, for that feeling of security that a father was supposed to bring. But every time these thoughts came, Emily suppressed them, remembering all the nights she cried, all the moments she needed a father and he wasn't there. This internal conflict left her exhausted, and she didn't know how to find a balance between the desire to protect herself and the need to forgive. Emily's rejection of John wasn't just a rational choice. It was a visceral response to years of pain and abandonment. Every attempt John made to get closer was a vivid reminder of everything he had lost and everything Emily had been forced to face alone. The wound opened by her absence was deep, and she knew it wouldn't be easy to heal. However, no matter how much she tried to push him away, there was something inside her that still wanted him to stay, to prove himself different, to really care. This duality consumed her, but she knew she couldn't make any hasty decisions. For now, she would choose to keep her distance, watching from afar, to see if John was truly willing to fight for her, or if he would, once again, leave when things got difficult. Sarah, from the moment John left her, was forced to face the harsh reality of raising a daughter alone. There was no manual or preparation that could have prepared her for this journey, but she knew she had no choice but to be strong. With each passing day, Sarah became more resilient, learning to balance her responsibilities as a mother and provider. Every tear he silently shed was accompanied by a determination that he would do whatever was necessary to make sure Emily had everything she needed. But this strength came with a cost, an emotional burden that she carried alone, with no one to share it with. Life as a single mother was a constant challenge. Sarah needed to be present in every aspect of Emily's life, from doctor's appointments to school meetings, while at the same time throwing herself into work to keep the bills paid. She often felt like she was walking a tightrope, trying to keep her balance without falling apart. But behind this facade of strength, there were times when Sarah felt exhausted, physically and emotionally. She couldn't allow herself to weaken, because she knew Emily depended on her. However, the weight of this responsibility, combined with John's absence, made each day a struggle with exhaustion. Emily, in turn, has always been Sarah's priority. From an early age, she knew that her daughter would have a difficult life due to her health condition, and this only increased Sarah's sense of responsibility. She tried hard to be a mother and a father, to fill the void left by John as best she could. But no matter how hard I tried, there were times when I felt like it wasn't enough. Sarah wanted Emily to have it all: love, security, stability. But she knew that no matter how hard she tried, there were things she simply couldn't replace. The absence of a father was one of those things, and it hurt her deeply. In addition to practical difficulties, Sarah also faced prejudice and misunderstanding from society. Being a single mother often meant being judged, being seen as someone who had failed in some way. People made assumptions about his life, about his choices, without knowing the true story behind his struggle. This made her even more determined to prove that she was capable, that she could raise Emily alone, but it also left her bitter. She felt like she needed to always be on the defensive, always ready to justify her life and her decisions, which only increased the isolation she felt. John's arrival brought all those repressed emotions to the surface. Seeing the man who had abandoned her return after so many years awakened a storm of feelings in Sarah. She was torn between the desire to protect her and the desire to confront him, to make him understand how much he had suffered. But most of all, Sarah wanted to make sure Emily didn't get hurt anymore. She knew that allowing John back into their lives was a risk, one she wasn't willing to take without making sure he was truly remorseful and committed to making things right. And so, Sarah prepared herself for the emotional battle she knew was coming. Faith has always been a pillar in Sarah's life, especially after John's departure. When everything seemed to fall apart, it was in faith that she found the strength to move forward, even when circumstances seemed insurmountable. The local church has become more than a place of worship. It became a refuge, a space where Sarah could feel welcomed and understood. It was there that she found the emotional support she so needed, and where Emily, although reluctant, began to develop a relationship, albeit shy, with the community. For Sarah, faith was not just a belief, but a constant source of hope and resilience. As the years passed, Sarah grew deeper into her faith. She saw the church as an extension of her family, a group of people who, like her, struggled with their own struggles, but who came together to share comfort and wisdom. Pastor Michael's weekly sermons, with their words of encouragement and reflection, became a sacred time of renewal for Sarah. It was as if each message was directed at her, as if the words of faith were a direct answer to her most intimate prayers. This spiritual support was crucial for Sarah to be able to face adversity, always believing that somehow everything would work out. Emily, on the other hand, had a more complex relationship with faith. Although she accompanied her mother to church, she often felt disconnected from the messages she heard. For her, it was difficult to reconcile the idea of a loving God with the harsh realities of her life, especially her father's absence and the challenges of his health. However, even with all her doubts, there was something about the atmosphere of the church that comforted her. Maybe it was the feeling of community, or maybe it was the simple fact of being by their mother's side in a place where they knew they weren't alone. Faith, for Emily, was still unknown terrain, but one that she was beginning to explore step by step. When John returned, the issue of faith became a point of tension. John had never been a man of faith. His life has always been guided by logic and the search for material success. He couldn't understand how Sarah had become so attached to religion, and his first reaction was skepticism. However, when he saw how faith had sustained Sarah and Emily all those years, he began to question himself. Maybe there was something there that he still couldn't see. Little by little, John opened up to the possibility that, just as Sarah found strength in faith, he too could find a path to redemption and inner peace, if he was willing to give it a chance. The family dynamics changed with John's presence, and as a result, questions of faith began to occupy an even greater space in conversations and daily interactions. Sarah knew she couldn't force John to believe, but she hoped that, in time, he would at least understand why faith was so important to them. She also wanted Emily, with the right guidance, to find her own spiritual path, a path that could help her deal with her difficulties and find peace. For Sarah, faith would always be the foundation upon which she built her life, and she believed that if there was a chance for reconciliation and healing, that chance would come through faith. John, upon returning to Sarah and Emily's lives, quickly realized that balancing his career and his newfound family would be a monumental challenge. He had spent years immersed in the world of business, where every decision was driven by clear goals and tangible profits. However, when trying to re-establish ties with his daughter and wife, he realized that family dynamics were much more complex and subtle. Every time the phone rang with an office call, John felt an internal tug, torn between the need to respond to the demands of work and the desire to be there for his family. This internal conflict began to eat away at him, leaving him in an uncomfortable position where it seemed like no matter what he did, he would always be letting someone down. The pressure at work didn't ease, and John found himself increasingly overwhelmed. His business in New York required constant attention, and he knew that his absence could have serious consequences. At the same time, every minute he spent away from Sarah and Emily felt like a lost opportunity to rebuild what he had destroyed. This feeling of always being absent, even when he was physically present, began to affect his interactions with Emily. She, perceptive as she was, soon noticed that her father, despite being there, was not truly involved. Every call, every message that distracted him, made the distance between them widen even further. John tried his best to divide his time between the two demands, but he quickly discovered that this task was more difficult than any deal he had ever closed. What was at stake now was not a financial transaction, but rather the relationships he had neglected for so long. He made an effort to be there for important moments, like Emily's doctor's appointments or small family celebrations. But even in those moments, his mind often wandered to problems in the office, meetings scheduled, and reports that needed to be analyzed. This constant battle for attention began to undermine his confidence that he could, in fact, do both at the same time. John's frustration with the situation reached a critical point when he realized that, despite his efforts, it seemed like he was losing on both sides. At work, his physical absence was beginning to create uncertainty among investors. And at home, his emotional absence was creating a growing rift between him and Emily. Sarah, realizing John's dilemma, tried to be understanding, but she also knew she couldn't go on like this any longer. She needed him to be present body and soul, to face the challenges that lay ahead. The situation reached a point where John had to make a decision. Either he found a way to balance his life, or he ran the risk of losing everything he held dear. Finally, John began to consider alternatives that had previously seemed unthinkable. Maybe it was time to delegate more responsibilities at work, trust your team more, and prioritize what really matters. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that if he didn't do it, he would lose his chance to repair the damage of the past. This reflection led him to seek help, whether through counseling with Pastor Michael or through honest conversations with Sarah about what they both needed from each other. John began to understand that success at work meant nothing if there was no one to share it with, and that his family, after all, was the biggest project of his life. Emily's health has always been a constant concern for Sarah, but what she didn't expect was for a new crisis to unfold just as John had returned to their lives. John's return, which had already been emotionally tumultuous, became even more complicated when Emily began to show symptoms of a relapse in her illness. What was already a delicate situation had now turned into a true emergency. Sarah, used to dealing with these crises alone, felt the added weight of having to manage not only her daughter's health, but also the emotions that came to the surface with John's presence. It was as if all the problems were piling up at once, demanding strength that Sarah didn't know if she still possessed. Emily's health crisis was the turning point that forced John to face the reality of the situation. Until then, he had struggled to find his place in Sarah and Emily's lives. But now, faced with his daughter's fragile health, he realized he would need to act more decisively. The situation required much more than simple words of support or promises of change. It required a true presence, a dedication he had neglected in the past. When Emily was rushed to the hospital, John felt a paralyzing fear, a feeling of helplessness that he hadn't experienced in a long time. This critical moment forced him to reevaluate his priorities and understand that his daughter's life was more important than any business or venture. At the hospital, the tension was palpable. Sarah was at Emily's side, while John, sitting in the waiting room, was consumed with guilt and anxiety. The situation brought to the surface all the repressed feelings of recent years. The remorse for abandoning his family, the desperation for wanting to make things right, and the fear that perhaps it was too late. Every minute seemed like an eternity, and John, who had always been a man of action, now found himself helpless, awaiting news from the doctors. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming, and he began to realize that there was no way to buy back lost time, no way to negotiate with fate. He could only hope and pray that Emily would survive this ordeal. Emily, in turn, fought silently, as she always did. She was used to the pain, the trips to and from the hospital, but this time there was something different. The presence of John, someone she barely knew, but who somehow still yearned for connection, brought a whirlwind of emotions that only worsened her condition. Even in the midst of her pain, Emily tried to process the complexity of her feelings. She wanted to hate him, wanted to keep him away, but at the same time, there was a part of her that wanted him to stay, for him to prove that he really cared. This internal conflict left her exhausted, both physically and emotionally, making recovery even more difficult. When the doctors finally brought news, there was a mix of relief and concern. Emily had gone through yet another crisis, but her condition still required intensive care. John, upon hearing the doctor's words, felt a weight lift off his shoulders, but at the same time, he understood that this battle was far from over. Emily's health crisis was a call to action, an opportunity for John to demonstrate, through concrete actions, that he was committed to being a part of his daughter's life. He knew it wouldn't be easy, that every day would bring new challenges. But he was determined to be there for Emily, to fight for her the same way Sarah had done all these years. This crisis, although frightening, also offered a new chance at redemption, a chance that John was willing to seize with all his might. If you're enjoying the content, subscribe now to be part of our community and explore stories that touch the heart and provoke reflection. Click the subscribe button and activate the bell so you don't miss our next videos. Join us on this journey of discovery and transformation. After Emily's health crisis, John felt it was time to face his inner demons, the ones he had hidden for so many years. The guilt that consumed him was not just limited to abandoning Sarah and Emily, but also to a dark secret he kept hidden, even from himself. When he finally decided to share this burden with Pastor Michael, it was like opening an old wound that had never healed. John revealed to the pastor that, before meeting Sarah, he had had a child with another woman, a relationship that ended in disaster. Instead of taking responsibility, John did what he always did. He ran away. This son, who he never recognized, ended up getting involved with the wrong people and eventually lost his life in a tragic way. The weight of this secret gnawed at John inside, and the guilt for what had happened never left him alone. Confessing this secret to Pastor Michael was, for John, a necessary but terrifying step. He always feared that if anyone knew the truth, he would be judged and condemned, not only by others, but also by himself. However, upon hearing the pastor's understanding words, John felt for the first time a small spark of hope. Pastor Michael did not judge him, but encouraged him to see this confession as a starting point for redemption. John knew the road ahead would be difficult, full of ups and downs, but he also knew he needed to make peace with his past if he was to have any chance of building a better future with Sarah and Emily. The weight of guilt was a burden John had carried for so long that he barely remembered what it was like to live without it. He knew he needed to confront not only his past mistakes, but also the consequences of his actions in the present. Confession to Pastor Michael was just the first step. The next thing would be to find a way to share this truth with Sarah without further destroying what little was left of their relationship. He was afraid that by revealing this part of his life, Sarah would view him with contempt, but at the same time, he knew he needed to be honest. Lies and deceit were the tools he used to build his life. But now, they were the same tools that could destroy him if he didn't change his path. As John prepared for this difficult conversation with Sarah, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of isolation. Although Pastor Michael offered words of encouragement, John knew this was a battle he would have to face alone. He thought about all the times he avoided responsibility, all the times he let the fear of discovery dictate his actions. But now, there was no escape. The image of her lost son, alongside the image of Emily, was a constant reminder of what was at stake. He had failed as a father before, and that guilt was a burden he didn't want to carry anymore. He was determined to do things differently this time, but he knew he would need Sarah's strength to do it. Finally, John made the decision to be completely transparent with Sarah, no matter how painful it was. He knew the truth could drive her away forever, but he also knew he couldn't live with that lie any longer. The guilt he carried was too great, and the only way to free himself from it was to confess everything. He hoped that Sarah could eventually find a way to forgive him, just as he was trying to forgive himself. The confession was just the beginning of a long and difficult journey, a journey of redemption and healing that he was determined to follow, no matter what the future held. After John's confession, both he and Sarah realized that the road to reconciliation would be long and full of obstacles. Although the weight of the revealed truths was difficult to bear, they both knew that if they wanted to rebuild what was broken, they would need time, patience, and above all, the willingness to heal the wounds of the past. John was determined to show, not just in words but in actions, that he had changed. He knew that Sarah and Emily's trust wouldn't be regained overnight, but he was willing to do whatever it took, step by step, to win back his family's love and respect. Every day, John looked for ways to be more present in Emily's life. He began to become more involved in daily routines, from small details like helping her with her homework to accompanying her to doctor appointments. These small actions, although simple, were the first bricks in building a new foundation for their relationship. Sarah, in turn, watched warily, still afraid to allow herself to believe that John had really changed. But seeing his constant effort, she began to open up small spaces of hope, believing that maybe, with time, they could find a new way to be a family. However, the reconciliation was not without setbacks. There were days when the weight of past hurts seemed unbearable, days when Emily distanced herself again, or when Sarah retreated into her own world to avoid more pain. These moments were a test of John's determination, as he had to learn to be patient and accept that healing does not follow a linear path. He began to value each small victory, a smile from Emily, a lighter conversation with Sarah, as signs that they were on the right path. He knew he would need more than just good intentions. It would take constant commitment and actions that demonstrate your love and regret on a daily basis. Community support, especially from Pastor Michael and the friends Sarah had made over the years, also played a crucial role in this process. They offered not only emotional support, but also a safe space where Sarah and Emily could express their doubts and fears. John, although he was still coming to terms with the concept of faith and community, began to see the value of this support, recognizing that he could not overcome all the challenges alone. Over time, he began to participate more actively in church activities, not out of obligation, but because he understood that this was part of the healing and reconciliation process that he so desired. Thus, time passed, and with it, the wounds slowly began to heal. John had no illusions that everything would go back to the way it was, but he believed they could build something new, something even stronger than before, based on truth, forgiveness, and acceptance of past mistakes. He knew that the past could not be changed, but the future was still open, full of possibilities. And with this belief, John continued to walk alongside Sarah and Emily, step by step, trusting that, with time and effort, complete reconciliation would become a reality, and that they could finally see each other as a family again, united and strengthened by the challenges they overcame together. After following this journey of regret, search for redemption, and the challenges of rebuilding family ties, it is impossible not to reflect on your own choices and the consequences they bring. What would you do if you were in John's shoes? How would you deal with the pain of abandonment or the guilt of having left those who matter most behind? Life, as we have seen, does not offer second chances so easily, but there is always room to try to do right, to seek forgiveness and reconciliation. Are you ready to face your own ghosts and change the course of your story? And most importantly, what legacy are you building for those you love? Don't let time and circumstances decide for you. Now is the time to act, to correct what needs to be corrected, and to value what really matters. And to continue learning and reflecting on topics as profound and important as this, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Don't miss our upcoming content that can help you build a more meaningful and fulfilling life. Join us on this journey of self-knowledge and transformation. We're just getting started,